Welcome everyone to this very, very special event. Welcome firstly to all the Hertford Street members in the room, and uniquely also welcome to the Heywood Hill customers who are tuning in via Zoom. My name is Nicky Dunn and I help to run Heywood Hill just around the corner from here. We are a bit of a cult bookshop for the curious and the cosmopolitan. And we offer a very special brand of tailored book selling to readers and collectors worldwide. And I mean it worldwide. There's quite a bit of overlap between our customers and members here. I just want a little shout out to Manfred and Peter, who are watching over their breakfast in Bel Air in California right now, and also to Daniel in New York at his desk. But the award for best customer of the day goes to Anne, who is watching from her bedroom in Sydney, Australia, where it is now 4 a.m. So well done, Anne. I love this club, and I revere, like everyone, I revere Robin, who is, of course, a monarch too. Robin the Bold, the King of Mayfair, no less. The Burley family have always bought their books from Heywood Hill, and long may that continue. And it's entirely thanks to Robin that we are all here this evening. Tonight, I hope there will be the first in a series of events, a collaboration between Heywood Hill and Hertford Street, literary conversations between interesting people. Heywood Hill and Hertford Street both share a liking for mixing things up a bit with some social, intellectual or cultural glamour, and I think we've got that in spades this evening. Tonight we gather to celebrate Her Majesty the Queen. I think we need a cheer for Her Majesty. I feel like getting to my feet. Our magnificent sovereign, and by a country mile, the greatest living Briton. At Heywood Hill, we're honoured to be booksellers to Her Majesty the Queen. So this was really the very least that we could do to put on, thanks to Hertford Street, this very special event. And what a splendid lineup we have for you tonight. Before I hand over, though, to our distinguished panel, there are a couple of important pieces of housekeeping. For those in the room, please be reminded of the club's strict no photography policy and switch off your phones. Completely off, please. That's mainly a reminder to myself. There is a camera at the back, but that is only focused on us here or on our speakers throughout, and it will not be panning around the room, so you won't appear, don't worry. There should be plenty of time for some questions from the audience, but I'm afraid only from those in the room. Please, those of you in the room, don't be shy, and wait for one of the team to get to you with a microphone so that everyone can hear the question before you speak. Robert and Joanna are going to moderate those questions. At the end of the talk, though, I will come back up and thank our speakers, and the restaurant team need to reset the room very quickly for dinner, as you all know. So please swiftly make your way at the end of the event to the first floor or the third floor, perhaps by way of the lounge, where you'll find my team selling books, and both all the books in there have already been signed, and they're very reasonably priced at £20 each. And for those who are watching at home, signed copies could be purchased online tonight at our website, the Heywood Hill website, or you can reserve copies by emailing us, and my colleague Katie is manning the phone, especially until 7:30 tonight, if you want to call her. Now, I cannot think of two better people to enlighten us about the Queen than this splendid pair. Joanna Lumley is an icon. There's no question about it. I'm sure she hates the word, but there she is. She is a peerless, lifelong bombshell. There, I said it. Also, a sensational woman of varied accomplishments, not only on screen, but far from it too. Everything she does, Joanna handles with great sensitivity and warmth, including this marvellous book. Where is it? A Queen for All Seasons. And she was quite rightly recently made a dame. So Dame Joanna, we salute you. And Robert Hardmann is a writer to his fingertips. There's ink flowing through his veins. It's very hard to spend a day without finding an excellent article written by Robert somewhere. And it could be anywhere. Often Robert has written about the Queen, and his decades of close observation of the Queen have come to the fore with this new life. Queen of our times. All I can say about it is it's absolutely gripping. Robert, we salute you too.
Thank you.
That's more than enough from me. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Robert Hardmann and Joanna Lumley.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nikki. I'm going to inch forward because I look as I've pushed myself back. It's unpleasant, isn't it? Oh my God, these chairs. It's like tragic pensioner movement there. Welcome to you all. This is such a thrill because it's very rare that you get two authors on stage writing and talking about exactly the same thing, which is adoration of Her Majesty. Now, Robert, you are just head and shoulders and towering on giants ahead of me in all this, because you've written already 3 comprehensive studies of the Queen and the monarchy and how it all works. Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, those very kind words, Joanna. I really wanted to just stand back in the 70th year of her reign and just take in this extraordinary span of this broad canvas. I mean, the previous books I've done on Her Majesty have tended to focus on particular aspects of the reign or of the monarchy, but I really had a sense, I think now is the moment that we have the longest lived, longest reigning monarch on the throne. And you know, people are starting to sort of maybe get their narrative from the Crown. We'll come on to that later, I'm sure, or tend to look at what the dramas of the present. And it's really when you just stand back and you look at the whole sweep of this extraordinary reign, going right the way back and beyond to the start of her life back in 1926, that you really understand, I think. You just get to the heart of who she is and how she's done it. But I want to ask you how you came to be writing about her, because this is a wonderful assembly of insights.
The thing is this: the publishers, Hodder and Stoughton, who did this book, got hold of me and said, "Did you realise that next year," and this was then, last year, that the Queen is going to be on the throne for 70 years and it's going to be the Platinum Jubilee? And I went, wow, it's so recent. Since the Diamond Jubilee, I can remember the Silver. I'm sure we can all remember these Jubilees, and they suddenly, as you get older, they're rushing. I said, really, so soon? They said, we think just something rather like a bouquet to be handed to the Queen, just a collection of things. Now, Robert has studied the Queen and been at very close quarters to everything she's done over the decades, but most of us only have heard her speaking in her measured tones at Christmas time and her comforting tones at times of sorrow or whatever. But we've never interviewed her. We've never known her thoughts on things, except what occasionally she's dropped, or just occasionally a smile or something might show that she's pleased with something. But we don't know her. And so the idea of collecting together a whole lot of observations from people who are intricately involved with her, from prime ministers going back to Winston Churchill, to people like Ban Ki-moon and extraordinary people like that, to celebrities, people like Dirk Bogarde and Cliff Richard, who came under her spell, either having lunch or just being knighted, Sir Cliff. I didn't mean to say just, but do you know what I mean? When you're just shaking so much and talking such nonsense, you don't remember anything about it. Right back to little children waving a flag in the street, and the Queen turned around and smiled at them. And I thought that by doing this mosaic of different observations over the years, we'd begin to piece together like a sort of jigsaw, like looking through windows out of a train as you just catch flickering glimpses, and you can make a picture. Of course, we know what she looks like. We know what she sounds like. We think we kind of know her, but we don't at all. So this was my task. And then, of course, Hodder said, oh, good, marvellous that you're going to do it. Now, here's the stuff we've collected already. Thrum! And through the door came about 120 contributions, completely varied. And they said, shape this up into a lovely book for us, would you? And so I thought, well, look, the worst thing to do would be to start right at the beginning, Robert, because it's so heavily weighted. The accession, when she knew that she was going to become queen, to the coronation, which was vastly covered, and those early years. Gradually, it would have thinned down, so I thought I can't follow a line through, because that, because I'm unskilled, sitting next door to Mr. Skilled, because I'm unskilled, I can't do it. I'm not a biographer. I don't know anything about that. I won't be. I'm not a historian. So I can just collect them and put them into themes. So the great joy for me was thinking of different themes which could cross all the decades and just show different sides of her at different times. So that's how I approached it.
Well, there's some really lovely tales in there. We must come back to the Dirk Bogart actually. That's a lovely one. But let's. I mean, you touched on the big moment, accession, coronation, and you touched on it in your book. Just if you can, just sort of remember what it was like learning that this 25-year-old mother of two had suddenly become queen of a large part of the planet.
Well, I was 6 at the time, and my father, with the Gurkha regiment he was serving with, was out in we were in Malaya as it was called then, not Malaysia. And my father, who had come back from the jungle and was then at HQ Malaya, came back suddenly in the middle of the day with a very sombre expression and said, "The king is dead." And my sister and I went, "Oh," because we didn't really know about the king. We lived in Malaya. We knew about the tin mines and the storms at night and the moonflowers. We didn't really know about the royal family at all. And he said, "Long live the Queen. God save the Queen." We thought, there's going to be a queen, and she was going to be very young and very beautiful. Now, of course, it was a year between accession to the coronation, and by that time, fever had gripped the wider empire, which was where we were. And the royal family, varying degrees of the royal family, were sent out to all corners of the earth to visit and represent Her Majesty. And I think we had the Kents, and we were thrilled to bits. And of course, my mother put on special evening clothes, long gloves, "Don't muss my hair, darling, please," and going out, and Daddy with his Sam Brown, all his white tropical, regimental dress uniforms and things. Off they went. And then the joy of the celebrations, the fancy dress parties, and the bits and pieces, the mugs, the pencil boxes, the badges. I had a little medal, which if I had it today, I'd be wearing it. I would wear it all the time, actually, but it disappeared. Actually, can I just do something?
Go on.
Can I just, I literally have kept some things from my childhood. Now, one I adored was the coronation coach, and that vanished in all my travels. But I said this rather mournfully and rather bitterly in an interview once, and a kind woman from far away said, "I've got a replacement for you," and she sent me a little tiny copy of the Golden State Coach, which I had a slightly larger one of, and I'm just going to show it to you now, rather like somebody on that channel which sell things. Look, I just want to show that to you. Is that not too sweet for words?
Sweet?
And it's the little golden coach, and it's slightly articulated, and so the horses can lead it clip-clopping, riding one, siding one, and it was just mesmeric going through the wet streets of London. I didn't know about London. I didn't know why everything was so grey there. And the other thing I had, which I have on my desk still, is this tiny figure of the Queen taking the salute at Trooping the Colour on her mare Burmese. And she's got, if you can see, cameras might be able to see it. I'm holding it in my ancient hand, trying to just turn it round so you can get its full beauty. And her arm used to go up and down, and I adored it. I could make her salute or just have her hand resting by her side. And then it got a bit worn, and a friend said, "I can mend that for you," and soldered it into a constant saluting position. Anyway, she stands on my desk. I just wanted to show you these things, which were great, great, great treats. But I think I'm older than you, Robert, and I don't think you would have remembered the Queen coming to the throne.
Sadly, I wasn't quite there, but I did go the other day. I thought I must go and see where it all started, and I made my way. I decided I'm going to go back to Treetops. It was, of course, Treetops in Kenya, where she famously went up the tree as a princess, came down a queen. That's the story everybody knows. The story that's less well known is actually the tensions that were going on. She was on the first phase of a around the world tour in place of her father, who was very ill, and she and the Duke had just arrived in Kenya on the first leg, and they'd done some engagements in Nairobi, and they were going up country to see their wedding present from the Kenyan government, which was a rather nice, a very glorified bungalow called Sagana Lodge. And they were very excited about going to see it, although they had just been warned there was a slight teething trouble with their new holiday home, one that you don't normally get, which is that a leopard had just climbed into the loo and had got stuck the day before. So there had to be a bit of leopard extraction. But they're very excited, full of beans to go and finally go on safari. And you've got a very nice account of it in your book as well, of Eric Sherbrooke Walker, who's this buccaneering entrepreneur who had created this tree house in a giant fig tree over a watering hole. And he also owned a sort of rather smart hotel down in the valley called the Outspan, and guests there would be taken up for a night or two to look at the wildlife. And to get there, they had to walk a sort of 600-yard path up a hill, and it was quite hairy. I mean, there were a lot of wild animals running around, and as it happened, when the Queen arrived, a herd of wild elephants were on the prowl and had been causing quite a lot of damage. And it was all a bit sort of touch and go, and the authorities had hired this famous big game hunter called Jim Corbett to be on hand with his rifle to protect the Queen, not just from wild animals actually, but also from the Mau Mau insurgency, which was just starting off in that area. So it was quite tense. Anyway, she got up to the tree, climbed up into the tree house, and had this magical evening watching all this wildlife before her. Absolutely loved it, transfixed. At one point, I think you mentioned in your book, she's offered tea, and they're going to have tea inside. It's a sort of two-story treehouse with a dining room, and she says, "Oh no, can I have it out here? I don't want to miss a thing." And she's up all night, into really late at night, watching all this. She's up first thing to capture these scenes, and of course she has no idea what's unfolded back in Britain. And it's not until later in the day, and she really is. She's probably one of the last people on Earth to find out. And she only gets the news by mid-afternoon, by which time she's packing already on and supposed to be heading for the coast to get on her liner and head for Ceylon, as it was. And of course, then the news arrived, and she had to come home, and that was the start of this extraordinary reign. But I think there's something. There is something haunting. You go back there, and it's rather sad and forlorn now. I mean, the hotel is the tree house got burnt down by terrorists a year and a half after she left. They even took the staff out, the terrorists, and actually executed them. With one exception, a little boy who was a sort of luggage boy whose job was to run ahead of guests as a decoy for any wild animals, so he could run. And he managed to run, and I met him years later, and he still has the scar in his arm. But anyway, so it all happened there, and you just have this great sense of occasion. It's extraordinary. They built a sort of a replica hotel on stilts nearby. That shut down because of COVID. The whole place is a bit overgrown. The poachers are on the prowl. A lot of the wildlife has gone, but you still have this sense that something extraordinary happened here. And the Queen, it's a nice account of it in your book, and she went back in 1983 and planted a tree on the spot as a sort of commemoration. But because there's no one around because of COVID, I went there with a ranger. Some elephants went on the rampage a few months ago and tore up the Queen's tree. But I don't know. I don't know whether they're Republican elephants or I just. It was quite nice that there were signs that there were still elephants there. But anyway, that's where it began, and so I mean that takes us really.
And I think, Robert, one of the things that touched me so much about this was that she was a very keen photographer, and she'd got one of these new movie cameras, and she couldn't wait to film the wildlife, and she was taking such care over it. And remember, this is somebody who knew that one day she would be queen. She'd known since she was 10. That's the oddest thing. Ever since she was a little girl, suddenly the sense of eternal freedom with horses and dogs and the countryside and just being a royal princess was snatched away from her, and she knew. And being, it seems, an extremely dutiful and serious child, she took all the teachings that she was given. And I think she must have felt, I wonder if she knew when she said farewell to the king for the last time before she went out on this journey. She knew that she and Prince Philip were going to be carrying the burden of this, but rather thrilling burden of a huge world trip. And suddenly it was over. Suddenly, life would never be the same again. It must have been terribly strange. And then to come back, all the dutiful putting on of black clothes, which I think had to be carefully found, and coming down the steps back into kind of wet London, and seeing that line-up headed by the Prime Minister and knowing that this was going to be your life forevermore. Just extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the extraordinary scenes, and all the entourage. And Prince Philip sort of blocked the door because he felt it was very important that she came down the steps on her own. But it does sort of really emphasise the loneliness at the top in a way, that scene. And there is the great Churchill, and I see at the back we've got Churchill's great biographer Andrew Roberts there. Hello, Andrew. You know, there is Churchill, head bowed, unable to speak. He's so emotional, and that's the start of the reign. Churchill, you know, I mean, the Korean War's still going on. Britain's still on rations. Very few people own cars or TVs. And you look at the world that existed then, and then you look at the world now, and you get a sense of just how much change she's witnessed, she's reigned through, and yet that character remains unchanged. I mean, she is, I think, one of the great appeals that you talk to people around the world about her is her authenticity, how she is this utterly reliable constant. But we're not going to do a sort of chronology through the reign. Don't worry, we're going to sort of jump around a bit, I think, because I want to hear your thoughts, Joanna, on. I mean, are we ever going to talk about a new Elizabethan age? Has this age just been so big and so long and so varied that that we can even discuss an Elizabethan age? I mean, what to you sums up that essence?
I'm a pensioner now, and have been for ages. And most of the country, much younger than me, has never known anything but the Queen. So to call it an age means everybody's lifetime. It is our life. There is no other life than without the Queen. So I don't think people call it an age as if you might talk about the Queen Anne reign or something when you could see the beginning and the end of it. Most of us are just in it forevermore. So, and I think we've stopped talking about things like age. We seem to have jumped so fast, you know. A lot of people said, oh, in your grandparents' day, can you imagine? First of all, you know, telephones, you had to go, hello, and go through this. Can you put me through? And a lot of that sort of tapping and went on. And nobody'd seen people flying in the air and all this business. What we've seen in our time is, I think, even more extraordinary, which is that Robert's got something here, which is a phone. But he could be talking to you, Anne, in Australia now, on picture, but with no wires attached to it. This is what is extraordinary. Some hugely swifter connectivity has appeared, which in the old days, when I was at school, we wrote letters. They took a day to go because you would put a stamp on. You didn't have to say first class because the next day it would get there. Ha ha. Do you know what I mean? And so everything has changed in a way that we can't, I mean, literally there's nothing the same. There's nothing the same. And so I don't think we can call it an age. I think just a different lifetime has slipped away. And the Queen is part of our entire lifetimes, I think.
What, I mean, people always want to know what's it like when you meet her, and you have met her more than most. I mean,
have you? Have I met her more than you? Is this a competition?
No, I'll surrender. I tend to get shown the tradesman's entrance, whereas you're normally in a nice greeting line backstage or front of stage. Tell me about your one of those meetings, and also tell us. I want to hear also. There's a wonderful story in the book about when Joanna ended up having to try and keep Princess Margaret. I think she wasn't supposed to be drinking, but I think that lapsed, didn't it?
It was heaven. But first of all, meeting the Queen, I do promise you, and many of you will have met the Queen or have been in her presence anyway, the first thing that shocks you is that you're seeing the real thing, not the coin or the person on banknotes or stamps or somebody who's so familiar to you from photographs that you think, but when you see her, it's just extraordinary. It's sort of Beethovenian chord playing, and you immediately become dumbstruck. And all the things you knew you were supposed to say, which is Your Majesty, and curtsy a little bit, but not grovelingly. I quite loved grovel. I'd practiced full tilt grovel to the ground. People said, don't be disgusting, you don't do that anymore. But what you do is you do a graceful curtsy, you say Your Majesty, and then after that you say ma'am to rhyme with ham, and you go through all this. Well, of course, when the time comes, you're incapable because you're so afraid. You mustn't start the conversation. And you mustn't think you can end the conversation. And you mustn't be boring. And you mustn't say too much. And you mustn't, and all kinds of things you mustn't. And so and although I adore people who are older than me, and because I was brought up to be very polite to people of my parents' generation, it isn't difficult for me to speak to older people. It's very, very difficult to speak to the Queen. the first time. So she meets crowds of blubbering, chuntering individuals. Not one who's got a single sentence to say that makes any sense at all. And she does it so well and so kindly. But I do remember once I was at a boat launch, and I had named the boat before this wonderful man, Pete Goss. He'd been round the world sailor, and I'd named his first boat, the Aquacorum, and this was his second boat, and the Queen was going to name it. And so he had invited me to come and be in part of the lineup to see this great excitement. And she came along the road looking at people. This is what astonished me. She came along the road and she came to me and she said, "What are you doing here?" And so I sort of muttered out my excuse of why I was there. She gave me a bit of a look and went on. And so things like that, and I thought, she knows, oh my God, she knows I shouldn't be there. Well, I am here, but oh my goodness, my goodness. But the thing about Princess Margaret, I was in a play at the Vaudeville, beautiful, beautiful coward play called Blithe Spirit, and I was playing Elvira, the ghostly wife who returns to haunt her husband. So I was dressed head to toe in kind of white and pale grey, and I had stuff called wet white on my body, which is the kind of body makeup that it doesn't make you slimy, but it makes you white, white, white. My hair was very pale. And I thought, God, I will look like a piece of mashed potato on the stage. I better do something. So I had lovely red lips, so that at least you could see who was speaking when I came on. Something would happen on the stage. And Princess Margaret had come to the theatre that night, and she said, "I want the cast to remain behind, because I'd like to go and see them." She came sweeping round to my dressing room, and Janie Stevens was there, her lady-in-waiting, who I knew. And Princess Margaret said, "Why have you got a red mouth?" And I said, "Well, exactly this. I had a fear that I would look like ectoplasm if I just didn't, and you wouldn't know who was speaking." She said, "I think if you're dead, you should have a white mouth." And I went, "Gross." And she said, "Come on, let's go to this reception." Now, at the time, we'd all been told that Princess Margaret was not to be offered drink. But you can't have a reception and not offer Princess Margaret a drink. Anyway, there was no drink. And also we were a thirsty cast, and so the whole thing was going to look awful. And Princess Margaret said, "Come on, follow me." And so we dutifully followed her along this corridor, round to one of the boxes, and we got in there, and she got out her, you know she smoked, she got out her cigarette holder with a cigarette on the end of it, lit that up, and got out of her bag a small bottle of whiskey. So we sat in the box and we smoked cigarettes and drank whiskey. And you know, it was the happiest thing in the world. I loved her. She
The
made me
naughty
laugh
girls from
such a
school.
lot. Yeah, it was magic. She was magic. But I think that people gradually, as you probably get more and more familiar with the Queen and understand her more, are used to the sound of her voice, are used to her height, her colouring. Lots of people, when they meet her, just went, "Oh, her eyes are so blue. She's so small, her skin's so perfect." People are also taken aback by seeing the real thing. And it's the same when you meet a movie star, funnily enough. You've seen them on screen, but when you see them, there's nothing quite to enable your tongue to make sense, or your brain.
Yeah, it's rather endearing. I discovered when I was writing my book unpublished manuscript by Douglas Fairbanks Jr., in which he's recounting the evening when he invited all the royal family to his daughter's coming out party that he was holding at Cliveden. And it's fascinating. It's just when the Queen is supposed to be modernising and not going to coming out parties. It's the last year of the Debs, but she clearly wants to go because she knows it's going to be full of Hollywood stars. And she brings her whole Royal Ascot house party, and all the Douglas Fairbanks Jr. sort of address book are there, and he knew the royal family quite well. I mean, they were good mates, and he served with Mountbatten in the war, so it was all very relaxed. But at one point, the Queen took him by the arm and said, "Could we go into a bit of rubbernecking? People don't think I'm impressed by all this, but I do love a bit of rubbernecking." and she just wanted to see these Hollywood stars. I mean, it was a nice sort of human snapshot.
I love that. I've got in my book the great painter Pietro Annigoni, who had 2 goes at painting the Queen, and he was astonished to be asked and thrilled because he was a sort of society painter, and the kind of art world slightly looked down on him. But he was wonderful Italian. First of all, it was to be a painting to hang, as it still hangs, in the Fishmonger's Hall. And he said, "I'm going to do a pity. Sorry, Italians. I'm going to do a very poor Italian." He said, "What's he fishmonger? Why is selling fish to get the painting from the Queen?" And they went, "No, it's not that kind of fishmongers. It's terribly grand and you're going to love it." Anyway, he went to paint the Queen, and so he painted her in Buckingham Palace in the same yellow drawing room, chinoiserie yellow drawing room, which he said he began to love in the end, although he didn't like it to begin with. And the Queen was at the window, and she would look out of the window. And I think what he was very touched by is the Queen looking out. For instance, there was a minor shunt, a taxi had bumped into something, and the taxi driver had got out to exchange addresses or whatever. And the Queen said, "Oh, that poor customer, that fare's going to be ticking up, ticking up." And you think, we'd never think of the Queen thinking of those little things. We never think the Queen's looking at us. That's the truth of it. We all think we're looking at her, and she's watching. We all know, because we've all been told, that when she goes down a line of soldiers, she is the keenest one for anything, even slightly out of place, and her eyes going up and down you to see that all is in order. I think that's rather thrilling. And I think it's very, very touching too, because she is, I would have thought, the most stared at person on the planet, actually, as time has gone by. That's been 95 years of solid staring and recording your every move, your every gesture, your every facial expression. The terror of moving back like that and knowing the photographers will have caught that picture and maybe put it in the wrong place and to make you look as though you didn't like something else. Anyway, quite extraordinary, because there she is, serenely looking like this and being watched and watching all of us back again. I love it.
Do you have a putting you on the spot here, but a favourite story about the Queen from your book, or not even from your book, but just from meeting her?
A lot of people I read who'd sent in their pieces or who I talked to mentioned the Queen's, what they call her sixth sense, which is an extreme sensibility, an extraordinary sense of compassion. And at one of her Buckingham Palace lunches, a little private lunch, she has these lunches, and people are picked. Dirk Bogarde rather spitefully says, "Oh, it'll be me and somebody who sells ice creams and somebody who does something and somebody does something." He actually adored it in the end, but he was a little bit snooty about who might be there. But anyway, about 6 or 8 of you are chosen to eat at this small dining room, private dining room with the Queen. And one of the volunteers, somebody who'd been working in really war-torn areas of Afghanistan, had returned from a pretty horrific time out there and was put at the Queen's left. And she said to him, "Where have you come from? And what was it like out there?" And he found at that moment the horror of what he'd seen, limbless children, dead bodies, severed limbs, blood everywhere, suddenly rushed back. And toppling on top of that was the fact that he'd lost his mother only maybe a year before. And he found himself unable to speak and actually on the brink of tears. His lips began to tremble and he was completely silent. The Queen saw this, and immediately she reached for one of the little dishes on the table which contained small biscuits. And she got some biscuits out, gave him some and said, "Let's feed the dogs." And so they quietly fed biscuits to the dogs. And she talked about the dogs and how she'd bred them and what their names were. And they fondled the dogs' ears and chitter-chattered about dogs. And at the end she said, "There, that was better than talking, wasn't it?" And I thought that was so kind, so kind. She's so kind.
She is. She's very thoughtful, although those moments can have their problems. I was talking to the former Labour Home Secretary, Health Secretary, Alan Johnson, who went to lunch with the Queen after a Privy Council meeting at Windsor Castle. And the same thing happened towards the end of lunch. And it had a lovely lunch. I mean, they've been chatting away about all sorts of things. And towards the end of lunch, she asked for the dogs to come in. And she had her little silver dish with the corgi snacks on and just started feeding them. And Alan Johnson just sort of carried on talking, and it was all lovely. And at the end, he was standing outside waiting for his car, talking to the other cabinet minister who was there. I said, "Wasn't that a lovely lunch? Wasn't it great?" And they went, "Yeah, wasn't it marvellous?" He went, I loved it. I love the food. I love the cheese, even with those slightly funny biscuits. And Paul Murphy, the Welsh secretary, said, "Those weren't for you. They were for the corgis." And as he said to me, the first time ever, only first person known to have eaten corgi food in the Queen's dining table. But he said actually they go rather well with Stilton. But I think there's one person we really must come on to as well as the Queen here, partly because obviously tomorrow the whole country will be remembering the great Duke of Edinburgh. You mentioned earlier the Queen watching cars have the odd prang outside Buckingham Palace. He was quite a formidable driver. I once went driving with him, but he was president of the AA. So the most successful president of the AA, ushered in all sorts of reforms for road users. I mean, a man of many parts, I think, as we discovered at the time of his death last year, and as I hope we'll be reminded at tomorrow's memorial service. But you met him, didn't you? I mean,
I did. I met Prince Philip several times, and he was thrilling. He was so frightening, I can't tell you. He was like a vulture. He'd turn round, and you knew, because he just had that scrutiny about him. He would just look beadily at you. Once I was due to come to one of the Burma reunions at the Imperial War Museum, and I was in Scotland, and I'd flown down and my plane was delayed, and I'd got there slightly too late. I was supposed to be sitting up on the sort of terrace by those big guns for the first part of the thing, and sneaking in, and I just got to the edge, and he said, you're late, why were you late? I said, I'm so sorry, sir, I had to come down from Scotland. He said, so did I. So that was a bit of a shock. But he was incredibly kind, because at Sandringham, there's a small farmhouse which is called Home Farm, which is the private place, terribly humble, of where the royal family goes when they're not being royal, if you know what I mean, where they're allowed to go and just be themselves, cook for themselves, and it's just a cottage. And I was doing a programme about private art collections, and my job, there were 4 of us interviewing great collectors. And one of mine was Lord Rothschild, and I'd been down to Waddesdon and talked to Jacob. And then the next one was to be Prince Philip. And Prince Philip had said, bring the film crew to Home Farm. He invited us into that place, where he'd got a very few of his own paintings. Some of his father, Prince Andrew of Greece, was a good artist. And Prince Philip was no mean a slouch. I did something ghastly. This was ghastly. Look, there was one of his paintings. I said, I love that. I love that. Will you leave that to me in your will? Why did I? He gave me such a look of pity. I mean, it was pity. But he said, the great thing is about this place is that we've just got stuff which would have been chucked away. He said, look, we went down to the cellars of Buckingham Palace, found these sofas, there's nothing wrong with them, dragged them up, put them in here. And they made the fires, they cooked the stuff, they washed up. But he'd invited the entire film crew there. This was unusual. He was a terrifically non-grand man, terribly, terribly nice. I loved being with him.
Yeah, he was a remarkable character in so many respects. I mean, I think if you just wander around any part of Windsor Castle or the estate, and you just see his fingerprints all over it. I mean, after that terrible fire in 1992, he was the guy who the Queen asked to put it back together, and he did it. It was a huge restoration job, and it came in under budget, and it frankly, I think, better than it was before the fire, actually. But you go out into the park, and all over the place his schemes. You know, there's even a vineyard now. The Queen now serves Windsor sparkling wine at banquets for the toast instead of champagne, and it's the sparkling wine that he planted. So anyway, I think it was very important to mention him. Now, I know we've got to come on to questions in a minute.
I don't want to do questions. I just want to tell you one quick thing.
Not quite yet, we've got time.
Just don't ask questions just for a second. What I wanted to tell you is that I went down to Windsor for the book. I wanted very much to meet Terry Pendry, and he's the Queen's stud groom and takes care of all of her horses. And whenever you see a photograph of the Queen riding out in Windsor Park, it will be with Terry Pendry. And he was quite wonderful, and he took me around the Mews there at Windsor. Honestly, even though the stables are Victorian, they are immaculate. And all the names of the horses are on the things, but beautiful names. And I know how important it is to have your name on your dressing room door looking nice. Well, the horses knew that. And they came swaggering up and looked out at me. They looked at Terry and went, hi, Terry. I went back in again. And he showed me the horses, and he showed me the horses. He showed me the Queen's present favourite horse, a little mare called Emma. And Emma came up and looked at me and kind of actually looked me up and down. Do you know what I mean? Checked me out. And then went back again, and back to looking at Terry Pendry. But it was quite wonderful to see the care and love and attention and liveliness. When the Queen isn't riding, she'll go down there with a bag of carrots and feed the horses. She knows everything. Terry said she is the equine queen. There is nothing she doesn't know about horses, about breeding them all, about riding, about training, about racing, about everything, but about horses, horses, horses. She is second to none. He said she is literally extraordinary, and she's got a touch with horses and dogs that has to be seen to be believed.
And I suppose in the last few minutes we have before we throw it open to the floor, but I think you and I should both reflect on maybe on just what you would see as her greatest achievement or achievements? Is there something that for you stands out as a great?
I think to make that
legacy?
promise, which I put on the back of my book, I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. And to make that promise when you're 21 and to keep it all these years, I think that constancy, unchangeability, unflappability, serenity, kindliness, unable to be shaken, because if you remember, so few days after the Duke of Edinburgh died, she was back there, looking great, smile on her face, done up, doing things. She's actually a legend, isn't she? We're living in a legend in our own lifetime.
I think we are certainly living under through the reign of one of the greats. I think everyone will always be very proud to say, you know, they were an Elizabethan, a new Elizabethan. Now, I think I agree with you. I just think if you're the head of any sort of dynastic institution, I think your main task really is to make sure you hand it on in as good as condition as you found it. And when you look at all the things that she's reigned through and how she is still far and away the most revered, respected head of state on today's world stage, it's partly down to longevity. For my book, I interviewed George W. Bush, who's the president who knows her best, because his father obviously entertained her when he was president, and George Bush Jr. had seen a lot of her. And what struck him was the fact that she's known 14 US presidents. And he just said there is no one in history, anywhere ever, in America or anywhere else, and there probably never will be, who has not just met but known 14 presidents, going right the way back to Truman, but she also met Hoover, had retired. And with the exception of Lyndon B. Johnson, everyone right up to Biden. And he just said he said, you know, in our country, 20 years is a very long time in public life. 70 is just, you know, no one can really comprehend it. But I think we should go to the floor with one final thought, which is that she still has one record to go. I have absolutely no doubt she's going to beat it. But Jubilee, great. But actually, May 2024, that's when she beats Louis XIV's record for reigning, because he had a head start as a boy king. So there are more milestones to come, folks. But in the meantime, I think questions, please.
Look, there's a darling hand.
Thank you. I would welcome our lovely actress's analysis of the Queen's performance skills and stage presence, because for somebody so sort of unknowable, she definitely has terrific powers in that regard. So I just wondered what you as an actress thought about her as a performer.
It's such an interesting question, because on stage we have a phrase which is to shine your lights on somebody, and that is when somebody's going to make an important speech, or it's going to be a moment, or the focus has got to go on to them. The actors on stage with them shine their lights on that character. I don't know how you do it, but something about you will will draw the focus onto that one person. Now, the Queen doesn't have to draw that focus because she is already literally burning with light. I mean, when she can't kind of be ignored. Sometimes at the big parties at Buckingham Palace, when everybody's, as they would say, let off the leash, and they're not being taken around, you're not in groups, and you can just muddle around, and you'll suddenly come across somebody in the royal family, and you go, oh, shall I sink to my knees? No, I better not, I better not. The whole thing is rather thrilling, and then you can be startled by somebody. But when she goes on stage, she almost doesn't have to command attention. And also when you're acting a queen, what you mustn't be is queenly, because the other people do that for you. So if you're acting a queen, you just walk, and everybody around you goes like that, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty. So that's how it is with her. There's a rustle, a susurration when she appears. There's a thrill, there's a silence, and the fact that she's tiny makes the whole thing, she doesn't have to do a thing. And she usually does this just completely beautifully anyway. She does it with a crown on. That's the hardest thing. The hardest thing I noticed in this was some of the terrible speeches she has to deliver from Parliament when she's opening Parliament, and some of the sentences she has to say. And I think you can see sometimes she's a bit peeved with the grammar, doesn't love them.
Yeah, she definitely finds that, well, she hides it quite well, but even some of the politicians, Tony Blair admitted to me that actually when he looks back on the first Queen's speech of his first government, he just says, oh, I should never have made her read that. It's full of absolute classic sort of New Labour gobbledygook about, New Labour, New Britain, kids are our future kind of stuff. And he's the first to admit, no, that's party conference stuff, it's not for the Queen. But have we got any other questions?
I'd just love to see something. Can I see in this room, we can't ask our wider audience, will you put your hand up if you've met the Queen? Look, plenty. Seen the Queen in real life? Yeah. It's exciting, isn't it? It's exciting. I love some of the stories I've got are from little people. One standing, she'd come from school and she was drenched wet, and it was Coronation Day, and they'd been waiting. The coach had debunked them. I think they were along the embankment. And of course, the journey that the great state coach took was very circuitous, to see as many people and let as many people see the coach as possible. And this little one waiting, and there was the coach. And she waved her sodden little flag with her dripping hair down by the thing. And she said, the Queen looked at me. I think she looked at me, and I was 13 years old in class 10. And she looked at me, and she knew it was me. And then it went on by. And people must have said, no, she darling, she was looking at me. But she did, the Queen did look at her. Because I have a great belief in this. The Queen looked at that little one. And she's kept that in her heart all her life, that the Queen looked at her.
I think people do. I mean, she's probably the most seen person. I mean, you talked about being stared at. I think that's a very good point. I mean, she's certainly, her image is the most reproduced image in history when you think of all the stamps and coins and banknotes in all her realms that she's been on. I mean, that is something. But in sheer numbers, and when she went on her first tour of Australia in 1954. It was estimated by the Australian government that 75% of the population had turned out to see her with their own eyes, and it's a big country, and you can't even begin to add up the number of hands she's shaken. But all the way through the reign, she would turn out in India. It was 1 million met her in Delhi, 4 million in Calcutta. I mean, I was in Ghana with her in '99. 1 million people on the streets there. She talk about stopping the traffic. I mean, she knows how to make an entrance, and it's been when you talk about soft power, which is what modern diplomacy is all about. And I interviewed the man who invented the concept of soft power. He said she really is, along with the English language, she is this country's #1 soft power asset.
Do you know, something's just suddenly struck me. Robert, just looking at you and just swarmed over with admiration. Robert, if we're doing this artistically, Robert has painted a full-length portrait of the Queen in his staggering book, which I can't tell you what it's like. It's like reading a thriller, weirdly. You can never put it down. At the end of every chapter, you go, I'll just do one more chapter. So Robert has done a full-length oil painting, and I've done a collage. But you'll love them both, I think.
You certainly will. I honestly, there's so much good stuff in your book, Joanna. It really is. It's rich, and going right the way through the reign, and all sorts of things. And I thought I'd sort of, I'm a bit of royal anorak professionally. I thought I'd sort of plundered the archives and the books. It's full of new stuff, yours, and I love it. And I also, maybe we could just finish. I can tell we're oh, hang on. Before we, I'm going to come back to the story of the Royal Academy.
Oh yeah. What?
You were standing outside the Royal Academy.
Oh yes, I love it.
We'll come back to that. But yes, there's a question over here. Sorry.
And you also promised us a story about Dirk Bogarde.
Oh, okay.
No, look, this is Dirk, who I adored, and I did know. The story's too long. It's in here. You literally have to read it.
Yeah,
but he was invited to lunch, and he said, no, I can't go to lunch. I'll pretend I'm working. And the second time, Patrick Plunkett said, actually, you go. This isn't just an invitation. You just jolly well go. And he went moany, groany, how awful it's going to be. And Dirk could be a little bit bitchy sometimes, but he was enchanted by the end of it. But the Royal Academy story. This was a huge event at the Royal Academy, and it was something gold and silver, something jubilee. The traffic was horrendous, and Stevie, my husband, and I were going in a taxi, and it was just stationary. And after about 20 minutes in the taxi, we said, this is it, got out. It was raining lightly, awful for my kind of hair. And we were miles down Piccadilly, and I'd got on high heels. So we started running all along, very unfitly, all along to the Royal Academy. And just at that moment, we were so late, the great maroon Rolls-Royce began its journey out of the Royal Academy. And I went, "Oh, Your Majesty, Your Majesty!" And I just curtsied where I was, just on the pavement, looking at the car. And the Queen looked round and flashed her famous smile and just nodded. And you went, oh. She saw me, so it was worth doing.
She saw you. She knew it was you see. Absolutely. There it is. Yeah, over there. Question at the back there.
Robert, a question for you, and perhaps for Joanna. People always speculate about the Queen's relationships with her prime ministers, but you mentioned the American president. Which world leaders has she had the most rapport, do you think?
That's yours.
There've been many who she's admired and got on with very well, and there've been some she absolutely can't stand. I'll start with the one she can't stand. Ceausescu of Romania, whom she still calls that ghastly little man, probably the most unpleasant house guest ever. A man so paranoid he brought all his clothes in hermetically sealed boxes because he thought the palace staff were going to poison the seams of his clothes, and refused to speak to anybody inside the palace because he thought it was bugged, and would only have discussions outside. One day the Queen was walking the corgis in the garden, actually hid in one of her own hedges in order to avoid talking to him. Another shocker, Idi Amin came to lunch. And the only occasion where the Queen's actually managed to avert a war over lunch, because Amin took her into his confidence and told her he was about to invade Tanzania. And as the president of Tanzania was a great friend of hers, Joshua Nyerere, a man who she had great regard for, as soon as lunch was over, she got on the phone to the foreign secretary and said, Mr. Amin is about to invade Tanzania. To which the foreign secretary said, "Oh, thank you for telling me, because he's just coming around here to ask me for some more armoured cars." Those are some of the baddies. But the goodies, she got on extremely well with Nehru, the sort of founding father of modern India. She got on extremely well with the Reagans. The special relationship had a few blips in the 60s and 70s, notably with Vietnam, but a real rapprochement through Ronald Reagan, and Reagan loved his visit to Windsor with the Queen, and he invited her back he repaid the compliment by inviting her back to California, which she'd always wanted to go to. So that was great. I think, though, the one who she really admired and just had the highest regard for was Nelson Mandela. He's the only world leader, only non-royal world leader, who was allowed to call her Elizabeth and get away with it. Once came out with the immortal line, "Oh, Elizabeth, you've lost weight," he said as he arrived. And all the assembled courtiers sort of froze, heads in hand. "Oh my God, did he just say that?" Didn't matter less. She thought he was absolutely marvellous. They were of a similar age. She was immensely touched by the fact that his first executive act, after he, on becoming the first democratically elected black president of South Africa, his first executive act was to rejoin his country to the Commonwealth. That gave her huge pleasure. He had the highest regard for her, the fact she refused to have anything to do with South Africa during the apartheid years, and they had these great meetings. It was just one of the most wonderful moments. 1995, Britannia sailing in, and we haven't even got on to Britannia. My God, the honorary member of the royal family, fabulous ship, and they're sailing into Cape Town harbour, and there on the quayside, Nelson Mandela, arm outstretched. Just one of the great moments of the reign, I think.
We've got to stop. Why have we got to stop? Look, we've got 5 more minutes.
We've got 5 minutes.
Is there anybody here who wants to say anything? Otherwise, we'll just go on. You see, you just can't be stopped. I wanted to ask you about 1,000 things. What I wanted to say that in my book, which you haven't done in your book, is lists of things, lists of how the tables are prepared, lists of what have to be done before the royal trips abroad and things like that, which I found absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
But what about your endless research on the Queen and the royal family? What is the bit that kind of grabs you, that brings you back and again and again?
I think with her, it's just the sort of calmness under fire. I mean, you just think all the things she's been through, and just never panics. I talked to lots of people who know her, who've worked with her, And the thing is, she's occasionally been accused of being a bit slow to act once or twice on certain things, but no one has ever said the Queen rushed this. You know, she just doesn't panic. And you know, I was looking back the other day at you know, people talk about the sort of the current dramas, noises off, the challenges to the monarchy in the last couple of years, and they're there. You know, isn't this all a terrible ordeal for her? But you've just got to stand back and look at this reign. And I was just looking at the summer of 1982, and there in very short order, she'd seen her armed forces going off to war in the Falklands, including her second son. Soon after that, the Pope comes to stay. Soon after that, Ronald Reagan comes to stay on this sort of historic state visit. Not long, days after that, suddenly the Prince of Wales finally has the longed-for son and heir. Great happy moment. In the middle of all this, she suddenly wakes up one morning to find this drug-fueled lunatic at the end of her bed, bleeding because he's tried to commit suicide with a broken ashtray, Michael Fagan. But she still makes it to the 11 a.m. investiture that same day. And then in the middle of all this, a few days later, the IRA blow up the household cavalry, changing her troops on their way to guard her. All that happened in the space of 4 months. And yet she carried on. I mean, that would be enough to tip most of us over the edge, I think. They put all that together in the space of a lifetime of public office. But to do that in 4 months, and, you know, that's been her life. And I just think it's the most extraordinary journey, really. And I can see a question over here.
Do you think the way she is, that it's nature or nurture? Okay.
Well, nature or nurture? I think a bit of both. I mean, clearly, the two great influences in her life undoubtedly have been her father, King George VI, and she reigned in his image for the first nearly 20 years of the reign, and still to this day absolutely reveres him. And the other is the Duke of Edinburgh. Those two people have shaped her, but a lot of it is nature. I mean, you know, she just is. One of her aides said to me, you know, she's just blessed with the perfect character for being a monarch. You know,
and I'd like to add a third one to that, which is her faith. She's a very devout Christian. She's always believed steadfastly. She's always believed that when she was anointed, she took this terribly seriously. She goes to church every week. She used to see Billy Graham, who we always used to think was a bit of a joke, when he came and did his missions at Earl's Court, and we could hear this thing saying, "Come here and be saved, I'll save you all." Well, he didn't speak had to do that. It's stupid. I don't know why I get stupid sometimes. Anyway, but the Queen loved him, and every time he came to Britain, she'd see Billy Graham and his wife. So this is an interesting extra inner channel of strength I think she relies on all the time. And having that, sort of, many of us have no faith or have different faiths or are fairly tatty and sort of high days and holidays, and that's about it. But the Queen is steadfast, and I think that's kept her with these two extraordinary men as well.
I think that's absolutely right. I can see Nikki looming. I think we might be...
Well, indeed. Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Joanna. Just three very, very quick thanks. That was absolutely marvellous and fascinating for all of us. I know I speak for everybody, but it is just a smidgen of the pleasures to be had from reading both of their wonderful books. But for now, let's just all thank Joanna and Robert for a fascinating talk.
Thank you so much.
The second thank you.
Thank you very much.
The second thank you is to all of you for coming, and for all of you who are watching via Zoom, wherever you are. I was looking at the Zoom whilst we were speaking earlier, and there are people watching all over the world, which is really exciting for us. Thank you for your support of independent bookselling, which is not the easiest game in the world. But you can, if you would consider supporting us further, there are books which Robert and Joanna will be signing for you, if you wish, outside. In fact, they're already signed, but they will inscribe some kindly, if you wish. And Robert mentioned earlier.
Can I just say that if anyone forgot Mother's Day, we're very happy to backdate the signatures, and you can blame the post, because it is rubbish at the moment.
And then the final thank you is just to the Queen. I'm going to try something which I've been to lots of pompous dinners, and Hertford Street is not a pompous place. So I'm sorry for bringing some pomposity to it. But I thought, given that it's the Jubilee year, we might do a loyal toast. And that simply means we all get to our feet and we raise a glass. And we simply say, the Queen. The Queen. And that's it. Thank you very much indeed for coming.